Good afternoon. How are you? Well, it's getting a little chillier here. Thomas Jefferson reports it's 36 degrees here in northern Virginia in Loudoun County. The humidity is 50%, not so bad, and the wind's 9 miles an hour, and I can feel it. The chill cuts through you. So I can't imagine being on a ski slope today. Although, if I bundled up, it would be fun. Let's look at the indicia of chaos that leads us, in the absence of a remedy, to self-help. So, for example, we're talking about the troops in Washington, D.C. Unsupported at law, unsupported by the facts and circumstances, invading the powers of any collective of citizens. Of course, that's not new to D.C. It's always been treated as if the mostly white men determining its existence thought of themselves as ministering to a plantation. And that persists today. For a fair amount of my life, they've been fighting about having representation there that was meaningful in the Congress. And the best we can do is you can sort of observe what we do to you as you vote harmlessly against what we would do to you. But we have this order from the president that's unsupported by statute, constitutional law, by which he says to take over and to be responsible for an area. And in each case, besides D.C., it involves a people that are thought of as a Democratic Party community. Although there is no such community in America, in the sense that we are a mix, no matter how Trump dislikes that, of every flavor of the partisan rainbow and of the differences between and among us that some find upsetting rather than find enlivening. So here we are. We have an unconstitutional set of facts that put National Guard in Washington, D.C. How could we measure what the citizens thought about this? Well, do you remember how a man worked in the Justice Department, got into a disagreement with a National Guardsman, and threw a sandwich at him? The hapless, one-dimensional prosecutors tried to prosecute him for a felony assault. The grand jury, which normally is somnolent when faced with any question, deferring to the opinion of the lawyer in the room, an assistant U.S. attorney or the U.S. attorney, refused to indict him for a felony. So the government can sue somebody with a misdemeanor. And so they did that, and they don't require the grand jury to agree. And they went to trial, and now a petit jury, which is a jury of peers, voted for acquittal. What does that tell you? It tells you the people have lost trust in the law. Sure, it's one person, but instead of treating it as a basis of a conversation and revision and, say, withdrawing the troops, who really have nothing to do but to terrorize and provoke the citizens of D.C. Now, there was a Northwest Virginia man who was interviewed, and he said, "We don't want these people in our streets." Interesting. He says, "And I'll kill you." Now there's a strong statement. He said it apparently if I remember correctly. He was a gun owner, but he didn't act upon it. Now, the D.C. Attorney General said when 2 National Guardsmen from West Virginia were in D.C. and were shot, and I think one may have died, if I read the report correctly, but they were, quote, critically wounded. And the D.C. Attorney General, he had sued Trump about the deployment of these soldiers in D.C. And as the necessary predicate for troops in peacetime had not been satisfied, and there were prohibitions, statutory and constitutional, against law enforcement personnel taking over a function, the police power, if you will, under the U.S. Constitution, reserved to the states. So the order to go and serve as a National Guard in Washington, D.C. was an unlawful order. And the courts disserve us when they can't decide these things rightly and quickly because they're intimidated by the significance of the offense, and they apparently, even when they decide the right way, they're reluctant to rush into this dispute for perhaps their own personal reputation, perhaps they also believe what they're doing. The failure to act quickly is almost as important as acting rightly. The decision to allow infinite numbers of appeals to take the burden of the decision off you is also an error. The courts have been one of our mainstays to preserve the republic, but they have to up their game. They cannot allow these delays to slow us down. It's good to have a 28-page opinion, but couldn't we do it in 5 pages? Couldn't I just dictate it? How complicated is the issue? And I think the answer is not very. And I think by spelling it out in such detail, unnecessary detail, we're having an adverse effect on the trust of the people for the law of the country. So we still have the fact that it's an unlawful order to send a National Guard into a community to conduct law enforcement and police powers. Now, the Attorney General said violence is never the answer. And this bromide makes political sense. When the law is followed, when the trust exists, when there is a remedy, if not for all, the feeling is, I had a fair hearing in the court. The law was respected. It is not for someone else. And it is certainly not to be determined by bullying and coercion and lies and frustration and abuse in every direction. So, when we knock down all the laws, and I've said this before, where do the people go to resolve their differences? And if those are futile avenues to right the wrong, then what do? There's a 29-year-old man, Mr. Rackenwald. I'm not going to take his part in the sense of misleading you about the details. But the reason to discuss him is because the president, our attorney general, so-called FBI, all these people are telling us a story that means we're having information that is disinformation, and you can't make better decisions on disinformation. You have to have the real facts. So who was Rackenwald and who is he? He's 29 years old, and when he was in Afghanistan, he served on the CIA counterterrorism unit called Zero Units. And they were called death squads by the Taliban. And as you could well expect, a person allied with the United States and working on a death squad, at least as by the perception of the Taliban, is a person that when we left Afghanistan was at grave risk because they were our allies in resisting the Taliban. Now, so when the United States left Afghanistan, it sought to protect those who had been with the United States, cooperated with them, and that included Rackenwald. Now, you may remember in 2021, there was a report how informants were being targeted, informants for the United States. And we passed legislation in the same period to protect those who helped America in Afghanistan. And there was legislation and a move for asylum for those who had fought, rightly or wrongly, in Afghanistan. They weren't people who thought of America as prey for some hidden mission. Now here's the question. People ask the motive. What is his motive? If they know it, they don't tell it. But it certainly wasn't to rob them. That is, these two National Guard soldiers. It wasn't to rob them. They hadn't had it wasn't personal. They didn't have some disagreement. There's no relationship between them, the two of them, and Mr. Rackenwald. But a question, a hypothetical, worth asking is whether the unlawful deployment of troops seemed similar to what he fought in Afghanistan when the wrongdoers were the Taliban. That's the question. Now, in the context of the legislation creating this asylum, I thought that was us being faithful to those who helped us at grave risk to themselves. And that asylum, scrutinizing those people who helped with us, were admitted on the basis of this legislation, up to and including Trump's approval during his administration of Mr. Rackenwald. Now, would I fault that? I don't have enough information to know, but I don't think so on its face. So, what is the key to what's happened here? I believe if we test these hypotheticals and get more information, we'll know whether the unlawful order by the president to put National Guardsmen in harm's way is the answer or not. So again, it's not that Trump signed asylum for this man. It is the question of the inspiration to lawless action, taking the law into his own hands for these interlopers, just like the fellow in Northwest D.C. I don't approve this. I think it's a shame and a disgrace. I think these two soldiers, early 20s, should not be the example of this. But if we're going to make additional bad decisions based on bad facts, we're going to have worse problems. Let's be serious. Sending 500 people into D.C. could prompt what? Resignation? Conformance? Or will it spur more violence in the absence of a regard for the law? And when people are talking about how one may not follow an unlawful order, was there a question here and a method by which National Guard could say, no, that's an illegal order, I won't do that. To date, as far as I know, no soldier and any of the components called into service have disobeyed because the order was unlawful. So the combination of lawless orders by the president, a failure to resist, an upside-down approach to the facts of the shooting can only perpetuate our failure to remedy what's real as opposed to making political fodder for midterm elections that may be determined by the errors we suffer today. But I'm more concerned about the deaths we'll suffer if we can't prove to the public that the law is relevant, important, and must be followed. We've seen it, we know it, and failing to act is nothing. Now, the other interesting thing that strikes me is how Trump won't follow the facts. In his easy thinking mind, his fast to blame shift, his failure to study any circumstance and the implications of it down the road creates a narrative that's a lie and in the most dangerous of circumstances. He wrote a Thanksgiving message in which he basically slandered and slurred and attacked people in America who disagree with him, all of us. It makes Carter's malaise speech look like a Christmas sonnet. And he wrote it attacking those who disagree. He walked out of a press engagement because he didn't like the questions, because the answer he had was not good, not satisfactory. And you notice he doesn't stand anymore, he's always sitting. And MRIs are taken for a reason. Because experts suspect there's something that might be going on, and this magnificent medical scientific device can be very helpful when you frame such a question in the context of this machine. Now, there's a report that Trump says it had to do with his brain. Now, everybody observing from an afar what Trump keeps concealed from the public is what that could be about. But an MRI about the brain could be looking for whether he had a stroke or not. Maybe he didn't have a stroke. Maybe he did. What did the test show? Show us the pictures of the MRI. Show us the analysis of the MRI. Let us know what's really going on. Because the president is quite erratic and increasingly dangerous in his decisions out of frustration to deal with the situation he caused by his misconduct. So, that's what I have in mind on this pretty chilly day in the Cathedral of Trees. I hope you got a kick out of, if you had a chance, my comments about leaves. All the best. Bye-bye.